So many of us like to enjoy time on the water or at the beach in the summer. But do you know what's actually in the water that you're having fun on? Welcome to Health, Harmony, and Happiness with Kathy. I'm your host, Kathy Stricker. I'm a wife to a law enforcement officer and mama to 3 lively littles. I'm a business owner, yoga teacher, health coach, and wellness and life enthusiast. And what I really like doing is connecting others like you with resources that could bring you health, harmony, and happiness on your life journey. These 3 elements are a result of that inner light that flows naturally through you and brings contentment. They happen when you seek to live mindfully as your best self and tune in to following this inner guidance. May this podcast serve as a nudge to discover tools that could help you on your path towards more conscious living. Hey everybody, as we wrap up the topic of cultivating harmony within the outside environment this month, today's episode is the second in a 2-part series on creating safe waterways and how that impacts us. Last week we talked about how your drinking water is impacted by pollution and some simple steps that you can take to ensure you are drinking the healthiest water for you and your family. Today, I continue my conversation with Ingrid Gronstal, but we shift the focus to recreational waterways. I myself love to be on the water or near water in the summer, and I'm sure many of you do as well. Here in Iowa, we have lots of great lakes, streams, and rivers that provide so much opportunity for boating, fishing, swimming, and anything else you can think of to do on or near water. We actually live near a lake that's always very busy in the summer, but it's a river lake and not naturally occurring. So with that comes the opportunity for pollution to impact it, more so probably than a naturally occurring lake that is maintained fairly well. So it got me thinking, what about those waters and how are we affected by land pollution that goes into the waterways? Some of you may even recall how we do have quite the issue with a blue-green algae in the middle to late summer months on some of the lakes that makes it unsafe to swim in. They usually end up closing the beaches and really discouraging people from boating or being on the water if it means they're going to be getting into the water. This happens not only in Iowa, but in other states as well. So you could be impacted by it simply because of things that are taking place in the environment around us. So Ingrid addresses this issue as well as others that will help keep you safe when you are on the water this spring and summer. But before we get into the show, I want to just thank you all for being here, for subscribing, listening to, and rating the show. It really means a lot to me, and I'm glad to be able to bring you nuggets of information that can help you cultivate more health, harmony, and happiness in your life. Remember that this is a journey. It's not about achieving something and getting an award for finishing. It's just about being more mindful in your approach to life so that naturally these elements become more present. That being said, keep going. You're doing great. I know you are. You're doing the work. If you're listening to this show, you're doing the work, and that is certainly something. Now, on with the show. Today's show notes and resources can be found at cairnyogawellness.com/podcast33. But let's move on now to recreational waters. So during this time when people are home and hopefully getting outside, spending a little bit more time in nature and exploring, maybe it's more if people haven't been out and about because they've been working. Maybe it's less and they're just staying inside. So we need to be encouraging people to get outside. But the idea is that probably people are getting out a little bit more, getting into nature, maybe having a little bit more time to explore, being more mindful of the environment. And we're also coming into the summer when it's boating season. It's time to get out on the water, get your kayak out, get your sailboat, get whatever boat you have, just get out and get on the water, maybe even go to the beach, right? Like those are things that we like to be able to enjoy as as community members, and that we have public places that we can go and enjoy those recreational activities,
Hmm.
right? So the farmer's spray from our previous conversation that was going into the water, that clearly has an impact on recreational water because
Hmm.
somebody could be boating downstream and they're being affected by that, or fishing downstream and they're being affected by that
Hmm.
directly. That's an easy thing to see. But what about those things that aren't so easy to see? And we talked about some a little bit in our other conversation, but the runoff and
Hmm.
the litter that may be in the creek behind the house.
Right.
How are those affecting those public recreational waterways?
Sure. And so I'll say, and I probably should have defined this um, uh, earlier too. Like when you work in an area for a long time, you forget to
Mm-hmm.
step all the way back for people who are less familiar. But when I talk about nutrient pollution, that's probably the biggest. That's the area of pollution that we work on the most, and that's probably the most pressing water quality issue in the state. And when I say nutrients, I'm talking about nitrogen and phosphorus. So these are um, elements that help plants grow. And so nutrients is another word for fertilizer in whatever form it takes. There's obviously there's naturally occurring nitrogen and phosphorus, but also a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus gets put on the landscape here in Iowa to help agricultural production, and that can be commercial fertilizer or manure. But a lot of that uh, nitrogen and phosphorus nutrient pollution is coming from agricultural production in Iowa. So when those when you have those fertilizers applied and you have, say, a rainstorm, that can either get into waterways as surface runoff, or it can infiltrate into the ground and then get into the tiling system. um, and that Iowa's agricultural tiling plumbing system, I think, is more sophisticated in a lot of ways than like city plumbing, city sewer systems. It's very effective at getting water off the landscape, and that makes sense when you think about agricultural production. You want to get water off the ground as quickly as possible so that you can get your plants in and so that you don't drown your crops. The unfortunate part of that is that um, means that those chemicals, nitrogen and phosphorus, get into the waterway also fairly quickly, either from runoff, either from erosion on the surface, or through tile lines. And so one way, and one really huge way that affects recreational waterways, is algae blooms. So those nutrients
That's what I
help.
wanted to ask you about.
Yes, yeah. So those help plants grow, and not only do those help land plants grow, but those also help water plants grow. And
So
so you
that's
can.
why we've been having more and more. Like, I feel like every summer it either
Correct.
gets earlier or there's just, it's like, oh, the lake's not safe to be in anymore because of the algae. And I have not ever known, like, well, why is that? Where does that come from? And is it on
Yep.
every water, water place that we have? Or
Yeah.
talk more about that.
So I would say that so obviously with any sort of natural system, it's more complex than there's a number of factors that go into that, and I think there's a lot of research going on to try to figure out exactly um, what circumstances make harmful algae blooms most likely. But at a base level, the more nutrients you have in a waterway, so if you have a lot of nutrients for algae to feed on in the waterway, and you have increasing temperatures, so increasing heat and light coming into those, your basic plant biology,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have a bloom of algae, and those algae, some of them, uh, those blooms create toxins, so cyanotoxins. Microcystin is the one that we're the most concerned about, but those can actually be neurotoxins and affect humans and pets and other animals. And so, unlike drinking water, high nitrate concentrations in recreational water aren't going to hurt you specifically, unless you're like
Sure.
drinking the lake water at a high level. But they do, small, nutrients in the water can create these harmful algae blooms, and then a small amount of these cyanotoxins can actually have really serious health effects. The other problem that you see coming from that runoff, especially if those nutrients are from manure, is that you can have bacteria. And so you can have high levels of bacteria in those recreational waterways if it's coming from manure or other animal sources. And then that bacteria, like E. coli, those sorts of things obviously can cause people to get sick. So those are our primary concerns with recreational waters. But yeah, it does seem like algae blooms are getting worse. They seem to be ramping up every year. And even last summer, luckily we didn't have any incidents in Iowa, but I think around July there were several national stories about pets getting sick, getting in waters that had algae blooms, being exposed to microcystin, and then dying within hours of that exposure. And so it was a pretty clear, a very clear causal relationship between the exposure and the negative health outcome to those pets. But then, just at a from an emotional level, you go out to the lake with your family, with your pet for a fun, Saturday trip to the beach, and then that night, you've lost your beloved family pet. And so I think that's, these issues are serious, and I think they're something that I'm concerned about. I mean, I have a big doofy lab that likes to go swimming and lick her fur afterwards, and the smellier the better. And so, she'll go right toward that algae bloom area. And so I think that it's definitely something we're trying to get more public awareness of, and help educate people on, like you said, what are the causes of these. It gets a lot of press attention, but the press doesn't cover as much of why it's happening, and again, what policy measures we can take to reduce that.
So what are some of those measures? Like, what are some of the things that can be done then? And my other question is, if once that algae bloom starts, is it in the entire waterway? Like, so if it's in Lake Red Rock, is that for the whole lake? Or if you can see it in an area, obviously it's there. If you can't see it, is it there? Is it,
I think that's something that researchers are trying to characterize better, but I would say it's not. I would say if you can see it, it's most likely there, but just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there,
Sure.
And so that's always a little bit of a concern. And the DNR does beach monitoring during the beach season. So from Memorial Day to Labor Day, they do beach monitoring for state park beaches only. So I think Red Rock they might do one beach on Red Rock, but I think Red Rock is
it's Army Corps,
managed by the Army Corps, correct? Yeah. So, and the Army Corps also does monitoring. That's another situation where, like, some of this information is disparate. So one thing we try to do, again, as an organization, during the beach season, we have an email communication called Weekly Water Watch, and we take the DNR's beach monitoring information, which is, kind of in a spreadsheet and kind of technical and not that easy to digest, and we try to put it in a format that is easier for people to understand. And then we also have, news and research about recreational waters and water quality. So that's, again, another service we provide. And we've been trying to, hopefully this summer, we can get the Army Corps' monitoring data as well, and maybe a few other monitoring sources. So try to get more information outside of just the 39 beaches that are part of the DNR's beach monitoring program. So back to your question about how can we prevent some of these things. Again, the main way you can prevent this is to keep those nutrients from getting in the waterways in the first place. So conservation practices on the land that would reduce that would stop nitrogen and phosphorus from getting into streams, and rivers and lakes. And so those could be riparian buffer strips, buffers along stream banks, just of perennial vegetation. So those plants take up the nitrogen and phosphorus instead of them going into the waterways. Wetlands are really great for this. You can have for tile lines, you can have saturated buffers, which are basically the tile line empties before it gets to the waterway, and then the roots of the plants take that up. Or you could have bioreactors. So there's a number of different conservation practices that could be put onto the landscape to mitigate that nutrient pollution getting into waterways. So these conservation practices have layered benefits. So if you have a wetland, for example, you are getting it's basically acting as a filter for nutrient pollution. It's also acting as a sponge. So if you're worried about flooding downstream, wetlands are a really good holder of water. So that helps mitigate flood impacts downstream. Anytime you have roots in the ground, especially perennial roots, that can act as something that sequesters carbon. So you can have improved climate mitigation as well from that. And then also you have a really nice habitat for birds and animals, and you can go out and do birding or go kayaking or have a nice outdoor space.
Right. It just creates more opportunity for recreation and to get out there rather than just being completely dependent on the lake or whatever that whatever is already there.
Exactly. Or more habitat for hunting or for fishing. And again, bringing in that kind of hook and bullet crowd. So I think that there's, one thing we try to talk about when we talk about, land use change and conservation practices on the land is there's a lot of co-benefits and a lot of value propositions for different people. So if you're not worried about flooding, maybe you're worried about, maybe you want to have, to hunt, or maybe if you're not worried about nutrient pollution, maybe you want to have a space to kayak that's kind of tucked away, or a nice place to hike, or something like that. So I think there's a lot of reasons for people to care about these kind of things, and we just need to remove some of the policy barriers that keep landowners from doing this.
So how do you do that? We talked about getting involved with your organization, and we talked about writing to legislators also. Is that those are the biggest things that we can do to take action, I guess, in our neighborhoods and our communities?
I think at a base level, that's those are the main ways in which grassroots advocacy gets done. And the other thing I would do is just kind of encourage people to rethink how they view some of these things. So I think in a lot of ways, water quality has been seen in the state as an externality of agricultural production. So basically, it's a cost of doing business to raising corn and soybeans. And what I'd like to see Iowans do is sort of rethink the value on this natural resource and actually think of it as a resource and think of it as something you could invest in. And if you were to invest in that resource, what kind of return on investment would you get? You would have, cleaner waterways for recreation. You would have opportunities to, maybe have a cleaner lake with a more active campground, that then you would have a brewery right outside of that would be a small local business. And you could have maybe a trail going to a neighboring town that has a similar wetland. And then you would have bicyclists going through and making a weekend of it, maybe with a hotel at the end of that, right? And so I think especially for rural Iowa that has lost a lot of their economic drivers, this could really be a way to revitalize those smaller communities. And you have, like you mentioned at the beginning, there's all sorts of public health benefits to having outdoor recreation opportunities, having opportunities to get out and exercise. I'm a pretty avid recreational cyclist. One nice thing about the Okoboji area up here is the trails are really great. And so you do have that, you can bike through little wetlands, bike around the lake, stop at a brewery, bike some more, stop at another brewery, maybe go kayaking, that sort of thing. And so I think Iowa does have a lot of spaces that would be really well tailored to that. We just haven't thought of it as a resource to invest in. We've just thought of it as something that's a cost of doing business to a different industry. So if we're going to talk about being a more resilient state and a more economically diverse state, then we need to have a little more balance, I think, in how we look at these resources and how we can invest differently in those resources. So I think it's kind of a paradigm shift of just encouraging people to think of what would or what could the value of this resource be to you
Yeah.
and your community.
I love that. That's what I was going to ask you about was, you mentioned resiliency the other day when we were chatting, and I wanted you to speak to that a little bit more because
Mm-hmm.
it it is just a mind shift, basically a
Mm-hmm.
mindset shift in how we think that these areas are going to be beneficial to the state in a different way. Um, I don't know. It's I grew up in a farming family. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's a hard that's a hard message to communicate though,
Mm-hmm.
because farmland does play a major role in our economy and in our culture here in this
Mm-hmm.
state. But recreation does too, and we have a lot of people like yourself who also really enjoy that recreational side of things.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
you're right on, and I think it's great that you are seeking those policies that can hopefully mesh those two things together a little bit more.
Sure. And we're also looking at ways, not just ways to make this valuable also to farmers. So are there alternative crops that are also perennials that would have these roots in the ground that would you know be conservation practice, or are there places that have flooded frequently that maybe there could be a program to buy out that land so that the farmer could be compensated. But if they keep losing money trying to plant it and then having it get flooded out, maybe that's the kind of thing where we want to just give that back to the river. Maybe have a floodplain or a wetland or a prairie or something there, and then you would have the farmer still be taken care of, but you would have this natural space that provides more, flooding protection and water quality protection and habitat and all those sorts of things. So there are definitely ways to do this. And again, that's why I try to really emphasize that, this isn't to place blame on agriculture or to say that that's, not, obviously it's vitally important to our state.
Right.
But we want to, maybe offer support to farmers who would like to also perhaps do something different, but the system isn't set up for them to do so. So how do we remove barriers and make it easier for people to think about farming and thinking about land use in a different way?
Right. So how does that um, mom of three who's hanging out in her house listening to this show,
Mm-hmm.
who doesn't have anything to do with farming, doesn't have anything to do with living in a rural setting, how can she contribute? How does this affect her? How what's her role, or how can she play a role in contributing to making these spaces of public waters accessible and able to be used?
Sure. So I would tie that again back to um, individual voices being important. And so if this is something, if she's sitting in her home and she's thinking, gosh, I wish, especially during this moment in time, there was somewhere, that I could take my kids hiking, that would be, uh, safe to go. So especially if you're thinking about social distancing, maybe it's, well, we have one really nice park here, but gosh, I wish we had three so that we could kind of, have a lower density of people in this one spot. That's the only spot we have. And so again, kind of thinking of resiliency in that way, how can we provide more spaces that people want? And I think that the first step whenever we talk to decision makers is we say people want this, and they say, do they want this? And so the question is, if that listener is sitting here and thinking that's something I want, then I would encourage them to tell someone that. I would go to a brewery, or I would ride on a bicycle trail, or I would rent a kayak on this, public pond or something. If it was available to me, that would be something I would use and take advantage of, and would be meaningful to me and my family. Because a lot of times, those voices don't get heard, and then the only people that decision makers are hearing from are very loud, well-resourced, but perhaps small special interests, small as far as like their percentage of the whole population. So again, I would say, tell our organization, or go to their city council meeting, or, write a letter to the editor saying, gosh, I wish there were more. It'd be nice if there were more parks, or more, if it'd be nice if that river right down the street was clean enough for me to put a canoe in with my kids. Right. Or I felt safe doing that. Right. And I think that that's really the first step, is try to think about, and especially maybe as people have time right now to sort of reevaluate what things look like and what things could look like, and maybe even reevaluating, what's important to them. Maybe take this as an opportunity to say, gosh, if things are going to look different, is there an opportunity for us to at least make some things look different for the better? Right. And what would that be?
Yeah, that's a fantastic viewpoint. It is. So how can listeners support your organization, and how can they support the Iowa Environmental Council?
Absolutely. Right? So I would encourage people to first visit our website. It's iaenvironment.org. And we have information there on how to become a member. We'd love to have people as members, or even just you don't have to become a member. You don't have to become a member right away, but we have quite a few of our publications on there. We also have information on how to sign up for our email list if you want to get information from us. We do, like I mentioned, we have our weekly Water Watch series. We also have, during the legislative session, we have a Monday legislative news bulletin where we kind of cover what's been going on in the State House and what policy bills we've been following, again, so that people don't have to. So we do that work for people so they can stay informed without having to try to dig through what's Sure. going on in the legislature. So I think signing up for our emails, becoming members, checking out our publications on there, and then all of the staff contact information is up on our website as well. So you can, send an email to me, or call me, or any of our other staff. If you have specific questions, and we can try to get back to you there.
Cool. Great. Okay. I've got two last questions that I ask everybody.
Okay.
The first one is, how does all of this work that you're doing bring or cultivate health, harmony, and happiness in your life?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I have a law degree. I went into law, but I didn't go into law because I wanted to, make a lot of money or have a lot of status. I really went into law because I thought it would give me skills that would help me make a difference for people and change things for the better. Understand our current structures so that I could understand how to, operate within them and influence them for, to create change for the better. So I think I'm really, really lucky to have landed in a position where I feel like the work I do every day helps the environment and the people who live within this environment in my home state be safer and healthier and happier.
Yeah, you really get to make a difference with what you're doing.
Yeah, and so I think that's especially at a But again, at a time like this, when maybe everyone, including myself, is sort of taking stock of where they're at and what they're doing, I still think this work is really important. And I think that this highlights, the importance of science and the importance of public health and the importance of having safe spaces for communities. And so it's really important to me to have work that is meaningful and feels like it is to the benefit of others. And so I think I'm really lucky that this job ticks those boxes.
Awesome. And that kind of leads into my next question, which is, COVID-19 aside, what is one thing that you're doing right now to bring more mindfulness or intention into your life?
Well, I think you and your listeners will probably particularly appreciate this, but I have sporadically practiced yoga, mostly as a recovery tool for, I do cycling and competitive cycling quite a bit. Right now, all the races have been canceled, so I haven't been training quite as hard, but that's been one advantage for me to actually use yoga more as a mindfulness practice than just a like stretching and sort of physical recovery, but actual mental recovery, and kind of taking time to do some more, poses that are maybe less intense, but more just, centering my mind more.
Yeah.
So I think reconnecting with that part of my yoga practice and trying to be a little more consistent about it, since, I have some more time.
Right.
In my home has been kind of nice during this time period.
Cool. That's fantastic. Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, I think that wraps it up for today. Gosh, I thank you so much, Ingrid, for taking all this time and for sharing your insights and, all of these ideas and just everything that we can do as consumers also to contribute to creating safe waterways, whether it's for drinking or recreation. I really appreciate all of the advice and the input that you provided for us today.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. I think this was a really fun conversation. And I always, if you can't tell, I really like talking about my work and the issues we work on. So I'm always happy to have an opportunity to, and I think especially get in front of audiences that maybe haven't heard this message before. I think, a lot of times we talk to sort of, there's a lot of events and meetings and things that we go to that are sort of talking to the same small universe of people. So I really appreciate you, reaching out to us and giving us this opportunity to speak to some new people.
I think it's fantastic that you're on here as well, because I don't know that a lot of my listeners, this is a topic that they would naturally gravitate towards or think of. So I really very much appreciate you being on and putting up with now nap time being done as well. And hopefully it doesn't overtake our conversation. Definitely good stuff to think about as it's getting warmer and we're spending more and more time outdoors, reconnecting with nature. Use this time of social distancing as a way to almost reframe your mindset and look at the benefits and the blessings of being able to go outside to explore our natural world and spend more time maybe in some of those public areas that we often neglect to take the time to go and visit. It's possible to still socially distance ourselves and not be in isolation, but rather to connect with others in nature at a safe distance, of course, and also to reconnect with nature and to remember how important and critical those areas, including the areas that involve water, are to our livelihood. They offer so much through recreation, so much through relaxation and peace, that it's important that we live intentionally to take care of these places so that they can be around for our children and their children to enjoy. So I want to know, what's your favorite spring or summer activity to do on or near the water? Find out what mine is and let me know what yours is in the Cultivating Health, Harmony, and Happiness community over on Facebook. All the show notes from today's episode, plus a bunch of resources and links from the Iowa Environmental Council, are located at cairnyogawellness.com/podcast33. I'm so glad you were here today, and remember to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen. Cheers to cultivating more health, harmony, and happiness in your life. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks for tuning in. If you like what you hear, help us grow this podcast by sharing it with even just one other person. And it would mean so much to me if you would take a moment of your time to write a review. Your comments and feedback are what help me continue to bring you topics and guests that can help you and others on their journey in creating health, harmony, and happiness. Remember to head on over to cairnyogawellness.com to get the show notes and links from today's episode. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Cairn Yoga Wellness, and to continue connecting with more resources that could help you enhance health, harmony, and happiness in your own life, subscribe to this podcast. Thanks again for listening.